Hey, what is up, everybody? It's Dual Threat Podcast here. Just going to talk about what our predictions are for this weekend. I'm one of your co-hosts, Drew.
And I'm the other co-host, Jake.
Thank y'all for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like and sub button. We're just going to get straight to the video with our first game being number 9 BYU versus number 21 Boise State. Tell me what you think about this game.
Yeah, so right now the line is -3.5 to BYU. This game is going to be at Boise State. It's an 8:45 kick on Friday night. Right now, I would definitely say that I am leaning BYU, but I have no real strong feelings on this game. Boise State is currently 2-0. BYU is 7-0. Boise State's putting up 45 points a game. BYU's putting up 44 points a game. Obviously, BYU has a bigger sample size for that. Neither team has really played anyone big on their schedule. This is really the only game on either team's schedule that either team should lose the rest of the game. Whoever wins this is probably going to be undefeated. Zach Wilson has been having a great season so far. 19 touchdowns, 2 interceptions.
2,200 yards or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I'm expecting him to have another great game against Boise State. Jack Sears through 2 games doesn't have an interception. He's only 19 for 23 passing, though. So they haven't been passing the ball very much. Yeah, honestly, I'm expecting BYU to come out firing. I think it'll be a close game, but even though it's going to be played on that blue turf there at Boise, I think BYU is going to win. What about you, Jake?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I think that BYU has just been dominant on offense. They've thrown the ball very well this year. I mean, you look at their quarterback; he's he's second now on the Heisman on the odds, which is crazy. I mean, BYU's quarterback, I don't think anybody expected that to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, you look at their rushing game; it's only been like 100 yards per game, so they're obviously not scoring off of that. I mean, they've got a few touchdowns. I think it's 1 touchdown per game as a rushing, but. Yeah, they're definitely going to throw the ball a lot. Expect to see that on BYU. If I'm anybody out there, I'm probably taking the over in this game. I mean, the over-under is at 61 right now.
Yeah,
I think I would take the over in this one.
With both teams scoring over 40 points per game,
Yeah.
I'm not expecting a ton of defense in this game.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So we both take BYU in this game to stay undefeated.
Yep.
And then we move on to our next game, which is Michigan and Indiana.
Yes. So currently, the Michigan-Indiana line is at -3.5 for Michigan. Michigan's ranked number 23. Indiana's number 13. This game is going to be at Indiana. Drew, I'm going to let you talk about this game first.
Okay. Well, first of all, you got Michigan coming off that pretty bad loss against Michigan State. And you know, Michigan State hasn't looked like a great team this year, so it's kind of hard to say where Michigan is after they lose that game.
Yeah.
But in week 1, they beat Minnesota pretty handily. It's just kind of hard to see where pretty much all Big Ten teams are, just because of how many games they've played, who they've played against, some people being ranked, dropping out like Penn State.
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird. I feel like we haven't really had enough have had enough weeks yet to get like a pretty good estimate as to who's going to win this game. I've seen a lot of people saying online that Michigan is going to win big, including Josh at late kick.
Yeah.
But I just don't know. Indiana has looked pretty good this year. I mean, they beat Rutgers, which is not a huge win, but they did beat Penn State week 1, and that was a pretty big win, even though they've dropped out of the rankings now. It's just hard to say, but I think I just got to take Michigan in this game.
Yeah, so looking at points per game, these two teams are deadlocked at 36.5. Indiana is currently allowing more points per game, but that's also because they went to overtime with Penn State. I don't have any real strong feelings about this game. I feel like we haven't seen enough Big Ten play. I could easily see Michigan come out and just stomp Indiana. I could also see Indiana turn around and stomp Michigan. I mean, Michigan looked horrible against Michigan State. They looked great against Minnesota. Indiana took care of business against Rutgers. They looked really good against Penn State, but also Penn State kind of choked that game away at the end. So I definitely think it's going to be a really close game. I don't have any strong feelings toward either team, but Indiana is the home team. I think I'm going to roll with Indiana this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan has not scored a lot of touchdowns passing wise. I mean, they only have 1 through 2 games,
Yeah.
which is not great. I mean, you've got 3 rushing touchdowns, but I mean, I'm going to take Michigan in this game, but I'm going to kind of expect a low scoring game. I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. The over under's 54. That's a good number. I think I would take the over, but I wouldn't take it by much.
Yeah. All right. Next up, and I feel like we're gonna have some bias here from one of us. It's Texas versus West Virginia. What do you got to say about that game?
Oh, I don't know. West Virginia looked great last weekend against Kansas State. Texas obviously looked good in that upset win over Oklahoma State. Texas has a very high-powered offense and a god-awful defense. I see a path for West Virginia to win this game. If their defense is able to show up the way that their defense showed up against Kansas State, I obviously see a path for Texas to win this game. Sam Ehlinger just has to play like Sam Ehlinger plays. Keontae Ingram is out for Texas, so Ehlinger will probably be carrying the ball more so than the other running backs there. Honestly, I want to pick Texas to win big and to cover this line. The line's 6.5 right now. I am not going to pick Texas to cover. And part of me thinks that this is like we talked about last week. Texas wins the games they're supposed to win. They lose the games they're supposed to lose. I'm tempted to lean West Virginia in this game, especially after that game against Kansas State last week. What about you, Drew?
Wow, I think we're flipping here. I think Texas wins. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I mean, rarely has ever Texas really had blowouts. I mean, you look at every game they've played, it's been within like 10 points.
They blew out UTEP.
Oh yeah, well, okay. See, I would say that usually non-conference easy games at the beginning of the year, Texas usually wins those pretty big, but they lose to Maryland,
Yep.
So I'm not going to say that, but what I am going to say is conference play tends to be close. I mean, they play Kansas close, they play Oklahoma close. You top to bottom, they're going to play every game close. I don't know about touchdown close. I think Texas wins this game in a pretty close one. I think closer than what Texas would want, especially at home. But yeah, I'm expecting Texas to win. I'm expecting Sam Ehlinger to have a good game, as he always does. I mean, he's thrown 5 interceptions this game, but I believe 2 of them have been off like 4th down, and it's the last play of the game. He's got to throw it in the end zone, sort of thing.
But he also has 20 touchdowns on the season so far. So
yes, and he has the most rushing yards on Texas as well, which is just absolutely insane. He's had them on his back, and I expect him to continue to carry them this weekend.
All right. The next game that we have on the docket is Florida and Georgia. Drew, I feel like you are going to have some bias in this one. What do you think?
Absolutely. Florida Gators are winning this game, ladies and gentlemen. And you will see that in my picks on the Friday night lines. I'm fully expecting Florida to come out and win this game. But bias aside here, it's hard to compare 2 quarterbacks. I mean, they're not going to be on the field at the same time. But my thing about Georgia is I don't think Stetson Bennett has that comeback factor in him. I think if Florida goes up early, I think the game is over. I mean, you look at the way Georgia has played with against Kentucky. They go up 14-3, and they're just running the ball the rest of the game, trying to get rid of, because they know they're not a great offensive team. They're great defensively, but you look at what kind of elite offenses do against Georgia, like what happened with Alabama. I think Florida is one of those elite offenses this year, and I think a lot of people are overlooking Florida's offense just because of the whole COVID situation, not being able to play.
Yeah.
So I do expect Florida to win this game.
Yeah, Drew, I'm going to completely agree with you. I don't think that Georgia's offense, led by Stetson Bennett, is going to really be able to keep up with this Florida offense. I think that the game is going to be played when Florida has the ball. That is what's going to be fun to watch. When Georgia has the ball, it's just going to kind of be boring. It's going to be a lot of runs. I don't see Georgia being able to keep up with this Florida offense. I think it's going to be very similar to the Georgia-Alabama game where Mac Jones was just able to air it out and just dismantle the Georgia defense. I see something similar happening in this Florida-Georgia game. I will say that I think that Florida's running game needs to produce in this game. Damian Pierce needs to show up and show out, because if Florida's not able to get the run going and Georgia can just play pass defense the entire time, I think they're going to have I think Kyle Trask is going to have a pretty tough time fitting the ball in there. But I do think that Florida's offense is going to be able to keep Georgia on their toes and kind of have a good distribution of pass to run offense. And I do think that Florida is going to come out on top over Georgia.
Well, another thing I wanted to point out is one of Georgia's, I think it was their safety, got in a motorcycle accident this past weekend.
I did hear about that, yeah.
And he's going to be out for this game. And he's one of their star players on defense. And that's going to hurt Georgia's defense a lot. I think Florida's offense is really going to take advantage of that player being injured, and we pray he gets better. Apparently, there's been good news about him. He's supposed to have a full recovery and be able to play sometime later this season. But I do think Kyle Trask is going to tear up this a few missing players on Georgia's defense. And there are also a few players from Florida that got ejected from last week. I think it was a defensive tackle maybe from the fight last week. So they won't be able to play for the first half. But I don't think that's really going to make a big difference. I don't see Florida's defense really, they're not really that great, but I don't think Georgia's offense is that great. So I think maybe one good defensive player on Florida is not going to make as big of a deal as it is because Georgia's defense is so elite.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, let's jump into this next game. It's a 2:30 kick for Houston and number 6 Cincinnati. I don't think that we're going to be on this game for very long. The line is minus 13.5 to Cincinnati. Houston in their last game got blown out by UCF 44-21. Cincinnati in their last game smoked Memphis 49-10. Houston is currently giving up more points than they score per game. Cincinnati obviously is not. They're putting up almost 40 points a game, giving up just about 12. I don't have a lot to say about this other than Cincinnati's just going to run all over Houston. They're going to throw the ball all over the place. I don't see Houston standing a chance in this game. What about you, Drew?
Yeah, as sad as it is, I'm not really the biggest Cincy supporter, but I think Cincinnati is going to be able to run the ball pretty much whenever they want against Houston. The only real weakness Cincinnati has is their quarterback isn't that great. I mean, he has less than 1,000 passing yards in the year, and I think he's thrown 5 interceptions, maybe.
Yeah, it's Desmond Ridder.
Yeah, and the pass game, I don't really think it's going to be a huge factor in this game. I think Cincinnati's probably biggest rival, I guess you would say, this year is probably UCF whenever they play them later this year.
Yeah.
But until then, I really don't see Cincinnati losing a game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like Cincinnati just has a really easy non-Power 5 schedule, and unfortunately, due to COVID, they're not going to be able to play anyone this year, and they're just going to hope that with a clean record, they're possibly able to slide into that last playoff spot. But anyway, let's jump into this next game. It's going to be Oklahoma State and Kansas State. It is a 3 o'clock kick. Oklahoma State coming off that loss at home to Texas. That was pretty devastating in overtime. Kansas State coming off of the bad loss at West Virginia. Drew, what do you think about this game?
I think we were going back to Texas earlier. They kind of win the games they weren't supposed to. Although it looks bad, Oklahoma State losing to an unranked Texas team. You look at the numbers of the recruits that Texas have. They are twice as talented as Oklahoma State.
Oh, absolutely.
And if the coaching was right at Texas, they should win that game every single time.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can really punish Oklahoma State for that. They're a great team as far as their recruits go. I mean, Chuba Hubbard is fantastic, of course.
Tylan Wallace out at wide receiver. He's had a great
almost 600 yards or something like that.
Yeah.
With 4 or 5 touchdowns. But Yeah, their quarterback isn't that great. I think 4 of the 5 touchdowns have maybe gone to that wide receiver.
Yeah.
And I mean, Oklahoma State's quarterback actually looked pretty decent last week against Texas.
He did, but he had those timely interceptions.
Right, and I mean it's Texas's defense, so of course you're going to be able to pass the ball.
Yeah.
So I think Oklahoma State's going to win this game just because of their run game.
Mm-hmm.
But Kansas State and Kansas State is going to keep this game close, I think. I mean, their loss to West Virginia last week was pretty bad. I mean, they got destroyed. It was 37-10 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm expecting them to kind of bounce back and get more into that groove. The reason why this game is so important, you might look at it and just think, I mean, it's an unranked game versus somebody who just lost. But you look at it, Kansas State's number 1 in the Big 12.
Yeah.
And pretty likely whoever wins this game is going to go to the Big 12 championship.
Yep.
So I am expecting Oklahoma State to win that game.
Yeah.
And they're going to win it on the ground.
Yeah. I completely agree. The line's minus 12.5. I think Oklahoma State's probably going to cover this. The over-under's 46, and it's a Big 12 game, so take the over. I think that Oklahoma State, like you just said, I mean, Chuba Hubbard, he's going to run all over this Kansas State team. They're giving up over 160 rushing yards per game. I think Hubbard's going to run for minimum 100. He's definitely going to break the century mark in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I think Spencer Sanders just needs to clean up those interceptions and just keep on looking for Tylan Wallace. And I think Oklahoma State easily takes care of business here on the road. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into our next game. It is the big game of the week. It is number 1 Clemson at number 4 Notre Dame. No Trevor Lawrence. Drew, what do you think?
I'm actually going to let you go first on this because I have a lot of things to say.
All right.
Afterwards.
So I feel my gut is telling me Clemson all the way. And the numbers are telling me Clemson all the way. I just don't know how Clemson's going to be without Trevor Lawrence again. Last week we saw DJ. Yeah, he played a really good game. Had no interceptions or anything, but it looked like the defense was missing Trevor Lawrence's offensive leadership, which was weird because I don't think anyone was really expecting Boston College to just come out swinging and Clemson's defense to just kind of roll over. Now, granted, Clemson's defense showed up in the second half. That's why they ended up coming back and winning the game. But I don't know if Clemson's defense plays the way that they played against Boston College in that first half and they start this game like that, I think Notre Dame's going to get out to a 35-7, 35-14 lead, and I don't know if DJ can bring Clemson back from a lead like that or from a deficit like that. However, I do think Clemson's defense is going to step it up. They had a few players that they were missing last week that are going to be back this week. Even without Trevor Lawrence, I feel like if Notre Dame wins, everyone's going to say, well, they didn't have Trevor Lawrence. If Notre Dame loses, then it's going to be a really bad look for Notre Dame because they're going to be losing to the backup quarterback. Granted, DJ Ungalawa, I don't know how to say it. He is just as good as Trevor Lawrence, according to a lot of analysts. Some are even saying that he's better than Trevor Lawrence. But he doesn't have that leadership that Lawrence has yet. The line's -5. I think I'm going to take Clemson, and I'm going to take them to cover the 5. Drew, what do you think?
I think for all Fighting Irish fans out there, they hope to see this clip on Freezing Cold Takes. I think Clemson wins by 17 or more. I think they absolutely destroy Notre Dame.
Wow.
And that is going to be partly off of my feelings because I look at Ian Book, not a great quarterback, only thrown 7 touchdowns this season. I mean, I think DJ might even pass him in this game from the season, only through 2 games. But what really just ticked me off about this Notre Dame is the Notre Dame team is their coach came out with the most ridiculous quote I have ever read the other day. It says Notre Dame he was asked if Notre Dame is an elite team, and he says, and I quote, "We're 29-3 in our last 32 games. We've won 22 consecutive games at home. We've won 12 in a row. I don't know. You guys decide." Well, Brian Kelly, you're not. You're not an elite team. And let me tell you why. In the last 20 years against top 5 opponents, you want to know what you are? 1-19. 1-19. And you want to know who against that was? Number 3 Michigan in 2005. In 2005, almost 15 years ago, which Michigan ended up being, I think, maybe 15th towards the end of that year. Your biggest statement win in the past 4 years was against LSU in the Citrus Bowl. And we all know what happened when you finally got in the playoffs against Clemson that year.
Yikes.
You have not won a New Year's Six or a BCS bowl game since 1990. I don't want to. Somebody get this man a Progressive commercial because he thinks. Not a Progressive, an Aflac, because he thinks he's Nick Saban over here. It's just absolutely ridiculous. No, you're not an elite squad. You're not an elite team. I don't even think you're that good of a team this year. You look at their schedule; they haven't played anybody.
They have not.
I mean, you beat Louisville 12-7. Granted, you had a few weeks off. You look at Florida, they had a few weeks off. They come out and just beat the living crap out of Missouri, which is what you were supposed to do against a bad Louisville team. Yes, you beat Pitt 45-3. Big deal. You beat Georgia Tech 31-13. That's the same Georgia Tech team that Clemson dropped 77 points on.
Yep.
You're losing this game. And I don't want to hear from Brian Kelly again. Ever. I don't want to hear that you're an elite squad. Get an elite win. Jimbo's been at A&M for, 4 years? He's got a better win than you.
It's only 3.
Well, there you go.
I know.
And this is what? Brian Kelly's 8th year?
It's been a while.
I don't want to hear it. I don't. That's all I have to say about Notre Dame. And, for all the fighting Irish fans and all the Catholics out there, I hope I end up on Freezing Cold Takes for your sake, because I don't expect this game to be really that close. I expect a backup to throw all over your team. Y'all's defense has been carrying your offense. I've seen people think that Ian Book is a good quarterback. You're not a good quarterback. You're not. Your running back has as many touchdowns as you have passing touchdowns. That's going to be all from me. That's going to be my rage of the week.
All right. Let's jump into this last game real quick. We have number 7, the Texas A&M Aggies, going up against unranked South Carolina. It's going to be at South Carolina. It's a 6 o'clock kick. Line right now is -10 to A&M. What do you think, Drew?
I think A&M wins this game.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially the way Kellen Mond has been playing lately.
Mm-hmm.
He's really starting to look like that quarterback that people have been promising he's going to be time and time again. South Carolina just looked terrible against LSU, which a team that just looked awful against Auburn last week. I believe South Carolina was on a bye this past week, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are going to have a bit of an advantage just because they've been on rest.
Yeah.
But I think A&M has been a good team, especially running wise in this game. And I think if LSU can drop 40 points on them, I think A&M's going to have no problem if they actually want to run the score up, which I don't think they will. I do think they win. Now covering, I don't know. I think they will be up by 20 points at one point. And I just don't think they're going to want to run the score up.
Yeah.
So with the spread, it's kind of hard to say. I don't know if I'd really bet on this game, but I would bet on the money line because I think A&M wins this game.
Yeah. Unfortunately for South Carolina, I think that they might be in no-win November right now.
Mm-hmm.
They are starting with Texas A&M. I'm taking the Aggies. They're going to be going to Ole Miss next. That Ole Miss offense, if they can get back on track, definitely could beat the South Carolina team. Then they play Missouri. Missouri looked pretty good against Florida, and they did beat LSU. And then they play Georgia. They're not going to beat Georgia. South Carolina is definitely in trouble right now. They are 2-3. I'm thinking after this weekend they're going to be 2-4. Like you said, Kellen Mond's been playing lights out. He's got 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions so far. I expect more of the same from him.
And one of the interceptions bounced off that helmet and took it back for a
shot all the way back.
Yeah.
Isaiah Spiller's been running the ball great. He's got over 500 yards already, 5 touchdowns on the season. Anais Smith has looked really good. I don't even know if he's a wide receiver or a running back.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, he's leading the team in receiving yards right now, and he's playing a lot of running back. So he's got 4 receiving touchdowns too. I'm definitely expecting A&M to win this game. I don't know if I'm expecting them to cover or not. Currently, A&M is averaging 30 points a game, giving up 29. Granted, they played Alabama. That definitely skewed their point differential. South Carolina is averaging 29 points a game, giving up 30. I think A&M is probably going to put up anywhere from 31 to 45 in this game. And I feel like South Carolina, depending on how A&M manages the game at the end, is going to put up around 17 to 31 because who knows?
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So I wouldn't bet on this line, but I would definitely bet on A&M to win the game.
Yeah, the problem with A&M is, I mean, they got Cincinnati above them, and if they want a chance at making the playoffs, Jimbo Fisher's really got to start running up the score. I mean, you got Cincinnati above you, who's most likely not going to lose a game.
Yeah.
So you got to show that you can beat SEC teams as badly as they are beating non-Power 5 teams.
Yeah.
And they get that kind of lead, and they just start to run the ball, and the opponent runs the score up, and it looks like a closer game.
Yeah, just like that Arkansas. The Arkansas game ended 42-31. Could have easily ended 42-17 or 49-17. But they gave up 2 late touchdowns as they were just trying to milk the clock, and all of a sudden the game looks a lot closer than it was.
Yep, for sure.
So.
And for our last game, we're going to look at Pac-12 opening up. We're going to have Stanford versus Oregon. And we're not really that big of experts on Pac-12, so we're actually going to have a guest speaker on.
Yes,
and,
a guest speaker that goes to Stanford.
Yes, and his name's Ben, but we call him Spray Tan, and we're going to bring him on now for you. Everybody, this is Ben. Like I said before, we call him Spray Tan. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing well, man. Glad to be here. How about you?
I'm doing good, man. So we talked about how we're not really that informed of the Pac-12, so we had to bring in an expert that goes to school at Stanford. So what are your opinions on this game this weekend?
Yeah, man. I think there's a couple interesting games this weekend. I think when you look at the Pac-12 in general, especially kind of from, kind of the non-Pac-12 perspective, right, with a lot of what people consider to be the more relevant football conferences being the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC to an extent with Clemson, I think you're really kind of only focusing on a couple teams in the Pac-12 that you'd really care about from a national perspective. Because the Pac-12 is really top-heavy this year, to be frank. I think in reality, you're looking at Oregon in particular. They obviously are coming off of a recent Rose Bowl victory led by Justin Herbert against Wisconsin. Justin Herbert has obviously since gone from college and is now playing extremely well in the NFL for the Chargers. And then I think you're looking at USC. I think it honestly kind of is a 2-horse race to a certain extent. So I think kind of from that perspective, when you're on the outside looking in at the Pac-12 and trying to figure out what you want to really pay attention to, I think you're really just looking to see kind of what those 2 games look like with their 2 first games. You've got USC playing Arizona State at home. They're favored by just around, I think, 11 points, depending on which line you look at. And then you've got Oregon playing Stanford also at home. So that, you both got some home games there. Each of the programs is kind of coming from a slightly different area, so to speak. So you kind of have some different storylines you want to pay attention to, so to speak. I think with USC, they really had a breakout year last year from their freshman quarterback, Kedon Slovis. I think that's how you pronounce it. He took over for JT Daniels really early in the year once JT Daniels kind of suffered a horrific, ACL tear. And really just propelled their offense forward. Clay Helton was kind of getting on the hot seat recently in the past couple of years and kind of had to try and make some changes, kind of similar, I think, to the situation that Tom Herman kind of finds himself currently in at UT. And he decided to kind of pursue more of an air raid style offense. And Kedon Slovis just excelled in that role. And USC, I will say, at least at the skill positions this year, is loaded. They're returning, I believe, all of their top pass catchers besides one, Michael Pittman, who got drafted last year by the Indianapolis Colts. But with Kedon Slovis on offense, with Amon-Ra St. Brown on offense as well, who's likely a potential All-American candidate, and with a really strong offensive line, I think their offense is likely to be best in conference. On defense, USC kind of has the potential to be really good. The question is whether they can kind of take that step to be elite. I think, and I'm again going to go with the UT comparison here, but I think I think they find themselves kind of just like UT did to an extent coming in this year, littered with a lot of talent everywhere. But they've kind of been having a hard time fitting that talent in schematically to really kind of make a difference and help themselves kind of put some distance, I guess, between them and the rest of the competition. It's been a while since the Pete Carroll and Reggie Bush years, obviously. So you have a lot of people in LA that I think are pretty anxious. And I think given the way the schedule sets up this year, due to kind of how the Pac-12 has approached the COVID-19 crisis and only playing 6-game regular season schedule, you're playing basically the entirety of your conference with one, or not your conference, your division with one out of division opponent. USC, I think, can honestly sleepwalk into the playoffs into the conference championship more or less at 6-0, provided they can avoid a misstep early. And I think that the biggest potential misstep is this first game against Arizona State. It's at 9 a.m. local time, which is just kind of absurd. I mean, these players are probably going to be waking up at, potentially 4 or 5 in the morning, to start getting warm-ups, going through their walkthroughs and everything. And I think, that's something in particular, I think, to look at. I think the Pac-12 is kind of scheduling it this early to try and get more national viewership, and try and put it at, I think it's on noon Eastern time, maybe 1 Eastern time. I'm forgetting my time differences there, but so I think that's a big game to look at as well. The other game, I think, to a lesser extent, I think importance-wise, and this kills me to say as as a Stanford fan, but I think that that Oregon-Stanford game is important mainly because I think Oregon's they're coming off of losing Justin Herbert. They're losing Penei Sewell, who's a likely top 5 draft pick, who opted out. They're losing Calvin Throckmorton, who was a first round pick this past year, who's no longer there. And they frankly are also kind of coming in with a relatively new offensive style. We've seen Oregon, the Oregon of old, back when they were with Chip Kelly and were really just, Marcus Mariota's Heisman year, those type of teams. They were just running the spread, focusing on athleticism on the outsides and really kind of trying to run up the score. And I think you've seen them adopt kind of a somewhat of a unique play style. I think almost similar. Granted, not to the same level of effectiveness necessarily, kind of similar to, I think, what Bama runs to an extent, where they're running kind of a power style offense, but out of a spread set.
So I was just going to talk about, you brought up earlier about how Pac-12 has dealt with the whole COVID crisis. They only have 6 regular season games, and then they have that 7th. You talk about how they're top heavy. So you think Oregon or USC wins out. Do you think one of them makes the playoffs?
I think it really just depends on what happens around them. I think this is year the Big 12. I think more or less, barring something crazy happen, I think the Big 12's kind of already played themselves out, right? So I think you're looking at likely Ohio State from the Big 10. I don't really see another team emerging there, especially with Michigan's recent loss. Penn State's already, been taken down. You look at the ACC, it's basically Notre Dame, Clemson, and they're probably going to play each other twice, right? So you're probably looking at one of those two falling by the wayside as well. We'll see what happens this weekend with no Trevor Lawrence in that game. Obviously, I know you guys have talked about that already, but it should be a super exciting matchup. And then you look at the SEC, and I think that's the real interesting potential hiccup here if you're a Pac-12 fan. It's just looking at you're likely going to have an undefeated Alabama, going into the championship. You're potentially going to have a one-loss, Georgia team going into the championship as well. And the question is, what do you do there? If Georgia beats Bama, you have a Bama team with a really strong resume over some really good wins, over A&M, for example, likely over Auburn, stuff like that. Then you have a Georgia team that just beat Bama. And on the flip side, if Alabama does win that game, then you have a really strong Texas A&M team who's kind of presumably if they show out and they're able to get business, done as usual over the next, 4 or 5 weeks, may come into that with a, I think it's a 9-1 record. 10-1 record. 9-1. 9-1 record, which would be extremely compelling against arguably the toughest, not arguably, I would say that I think factually the toughest conference in college football. Mm-hmm. I think it just depends on what the playoff committee wants to do. I think one of the interesting storylines to look at, I think, is just going to be kind of whether or not that 8-team playoff argument will kind of get some steam this year. Yeah. Because there's a lot of scenarios, I think, where you could end up with a lot of compelling teams: Georgia, Alabama, A&M from the SEC, an Ohio State from the the Big Ten, an undefeated Pac-12 champion, an undefeated Cincinnati team, and then a Notre Dame and a Clemson. Right, you're going to be looking at a lot of teams that I think will have a really valid argument for getting into the playoff, and you're going to have potentially half of them not getting in, and probably have some very livid fan bases as a result. I think, if I had to guess, I would say that if Oregon or USC wins out, given their name brand and the fact that they're already starting ranked, I think it's likely that they will make the playoff, barring there being some close games against some bad teams. And just if the Pac-12 as a whole just looks terrible, right? That's obviously something to consider, especially with this upcoming game. This is another reason that USC Arizona State I think is very important. Is Pac-12 after dark, right? Has been great for people on the West Coast, but the problem is no one on the East Coast can really pay any attention because it's starting at like 1 a.m. their time. And I think that USC Arizona State game is going to be a game that's going to have somewhat of a national spotlight on it. If both teams show up and they can't tackle, there's a lot of penalties and it's just ugly football, that's going to kind of stain the conference more so than the past couple of years already have. And I think that'll kind of decrease the odds as well. But I think Oregon's the best bet. If Oregon runs the table, I would say would they probably pretty convincingly make the playoff. So if you're not a Pac-12 fan and you're looking, let's say an A&M fan, or Georgia fan, or maybe even a Notre Dame fan that's trying to get in with the loss, I think you're definitely rooting for an Oregon upset. I think this week is probably not going to happen, to be honest. I think as much as I, love the Stanford football team, I think Oregon's just kind of got them outmatched. They're much more athletic, much deeper, and much more experienced returning too, especially on the defensive side of the ball, with the exception of one linebacker, Troy Dye. They're really coming back loaded and they're ready to go. So it'll be really interesting to see how they fare this weekend.
All right, so you look around the league and you see a lot of good teams struggling against pretty bad teams for the first week since there was no spring training, a lot less contact in practices. So I want your biased opinion here since you go to Stanford. How does Stanford win this football game?
Biased opinion, I think honestly, I think we're going to have some people on defense really overperform, frankly, their talent. And I think we're going to have to hope that Oregon struggles out of the gate with new quarterback play and with their offensive line. Kind of like I mentioned, I think Oregon's coming in with a new quarterback. They had a grad transfer from Boston College that they brought in to compete with Slow, or I think it's Slow or Show. The kind of the native guy that they already had at the school ended up winning out. But it was a very late competition, which as a Stanford fan, I'm hopeful means that, neither of them could really differentiate themselves. Neither of them are Herbert level talent, hopefully. And I think you're hoping that offensive line's dysfunctional and Stanford can get strong enough defensive line play to kind of cause enough chaos there. I think offensively, what Stanford's going to have to try and do is they got to try and rediscover the identity that they had, like 3 or 4 years ago with the Christian McCaffrey, Kevin Hogan led teams, or even earlier, with the Andrew Luck led teams where they were winning Rose Bowls left and right. They really did that off of establishing a solid run game, and they were able to beat those Chip Kelly coached Oregon teams. When they beat them, they were able to beat them by keeping the ball away from that high-powered offense. So I think if you're Stanford, you have to establish a run game. You have to try and keep that time of possession up, and you have to keep the ball away from Oregon's athletes because they just do not have, especially in the secondary, which is very depleted at the moment with injuries and with Paulson Adebo leaving for the draft. I think Stanford's got to try and get a run game going, or else this could get pretty ugly pretty quick, and Oregon could cover pretty easily.
Yeah, well, Ben, again, we just want to thank you for having you on. I mean, I know you got a lot of homework to do. Of course, you go to that a prestigious school of Stanford. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go. And thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's going to be it from us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for watching and listening. Hopefully you got a little bit of information for this upcoming weekend. We're definitely excited about it. Make sure to like, subscribe. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Dual Threat. We've got a lot of live updates during games and our early lines and stuff like that. Make sure to also watch us on Spotify. I mean, we're on there at the Dual Threat Podcast. Just in case you're on the go, you don't have a lot of time to watch the video, just throw on some headphones and listen to us at any other time. And again, thank you all for showing up.